Today I'm going to replace the right thumbstick, joystick, whatever you care to call this, on a Nintendo Switch Lite. In order to do this, you're going to need a small Phillips screwdriver, a tri-point screwdriver, and some sort of prying mechanism. I would also recommend you keep your screws very organized because there are quite a few, well, 3 or 4 different sizes on the inside, and you don't want to get those mixed up. I usually start by removing the game cartridge. If you have one installed, I'd go ahead and take that out. And then if we flip it over, down here on the bottom, we have the SD card reader. And this one actually has an SD card as well. So you might want to take those out to start with just to make things a little safer. There are going to be 2 Phillips screws down here next to the charge port. And these, as I recall, do not really stick to a magnetized screwdriver. So you just have to kind of keep track of them. They will fall out as soon as you loosen them. If those screws are missing, don't worry too much about it. That tends to be something that happens to these consoles over time. We'll also have 2 up here at the top, here and here. And all 4 of those screws are interchangeable. From here, we're going to have, on the back side, 4 tri-point screws, 1 in each corner. Now, once you've got the screws out, you want to be very careful about opening this up. There's a thin piece of plastic right above the game cards reader, and it's very easy to crack that if you put any pressure on it. So for that reason, we're going to actually pry down here from the bottom, starting in this area where the speakers are. And we just want to get right underneath the edge of the shell until it lifts apart like that. And we'll do the same thing over here on this side. And once you start to lift up from the bottom, then you can slide it upwards. Go ahead and open this up. And just slide upwards this way. You have to do a bit of maneuvering. That will come apart like that. And this way, we'll keep that little plastic piece intact for when we put it back together. And when we do, we'll start here from the top and do the reverse. Just latch it in from the top and then set it down on the bottom. On the back side, we're going to have to remove this metal panel. So you'll have 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, and a 4th one over here. This one is going to be different, so make sure that you don't get these mixed up. This is going to be one of the gold screws that we'll see later on that go through the motherboard. So there are different length and a different thread type. Once you have those out, you can go ahead and lift this metal panel off from the back. And the next thing we want to do is get everything unplugged. We'll start with the battery terminal, so we won't have anything as far as current running through here. These little flip-up gates you have to be careful with. They are pretty fragile, so I'd take something like this, and we're just basically going to get underneath and gently lift so that'll flip into the vertical position. And from there, if you have a good pair of tweezers, I find that to be the best way to pull these out. You just grab along here and bring it this way. And then we have our battery terminal here. Now, if you're careful and you don't touch any of the metal, you can go in behind the wires and pry this straight up. Otherwise, if you want to be more cautious, you can find something non-conductive, like the hook side of this halberd spuzzer. And we're just going to go underneath the wires and not put a whole lot of pressure on here. It should come out pretty easily. Just lift it straight up. And we are disconnected. Alright, so from here I'm going to go ahead and take off this heat pipe, and this is going to have 3 screws, 1, 2, 3. This one has been disassembled before, but if yours hasn't, you can add a little bit of 99% rubbing alcohol to this foam at the top. It will make it easier to separate the adhesive from the fan itself. And if you let that alcohol sit for a little while, it will soften up a bit. So we're going to lift from right here. And as you can see, mine's going to come right out, but you may have to just kind of get underneath here if you're trying to keep that in one piece. It's not really a big deal. We will lift this out and set it aside. There are 2 antenna wires that we want to disconnect. Make sure that you pry under the metal piece and not under the wire itself, because you can pull these out if you're not careful. So we're just going to very carefully kind of lift that off, both of these. Alright, those are out of the way. And let's go ahead and disconnect our game card slot reader here. This one is going to go from the left side. Let's see. So we're going to go this way and just lift it up like so until you hear it click. And it will be in the vertical position. Then we have 7 screws that need to come out. These are all interchangeable. Now we can lift this up and just slide it over to the left. And I'm going to go ahead and disconnect a few more cables. So we have our thumbstick connector here, fan connector here, and we've actually got 2 more, these larger ones here for the LCD and the touchscreen. So you want to be careful with these. I do find that you can sometimes do this with your fingernail. It just kind of depends on the person. So if you're comfortable with that, you can do it that way. Otherwise, a pry tool like this, spudger like this, like I said, if you get used to the feel for these, you can just kind of very carefully lift them straight up. A lot of people do this with their fingernail. This one's a little trickier when I'm on camera. Okay, and then these small ones, I do recommend you use some tweezers for because they're a little tricky to get to. But it just depends on you. And this one's going to go upward that way. Alright, so we've got pretty much everything unplugged. Again, we're going to go underneath these little ribbon cables and just slide them outward. Here and here. Same with this one. I think we're going to come in from this side. And then our fan connector will also do from here, that way. We do not need to remove the fan for this replacement, but we do need to take off this trigger up here. And these are a little tricky because there is a spring underneath here. So I recommend you watch this section before you do it yourself. We have 2 screws. Again, these are the gold screws. And once you get these out, you just want to be careful. Everything needs to stay aligned when we put it back in. If you're lucky, you might be able to grab underneath and just lift everything at once, like that. But if it comes apart, don't panic. This little piece is on the outside here. And then we've got a little rubber stopper underneath, and you'll see that that has to align onto this thing with the bump facing inward like that when we put it back together. More importantly, this little spring right here, you do not want to lose, and it's going to be fun maneuvering that back into position, so just be careful on that. I'll zoom in when we do the installation so you can see how we can get this thing seated properly. We're going to have a few more screws that need to come out. There are 2 down here by the charge port, 1 over here, and then we've got 3 gold screws, 1, 2, and 3 on the left. So these are all different than most of the other screws. Make sure you don't get them mixed up. I'm also going to put this under the microscope when we do this part because this little piece right here is a little tricky. You can leave it plugged in. And like I said, you're just going to have to do some maneuvering. Sometimes you can get this side of it and just kind of rotate it counterclockwise a bit. And that may help you get this thing out, but it's just kind of a little awkward the way that it's in here because this plastic piece is going under the board. So you might be able to get it all here at once, but otherwise you might have to kind of lift it up to the side like that. And we'll just kind of keep this together for now. Set that over here. And we're just about done. So basically we've got 2 screws here and here that need to come out. And underneath this there's going to be a little plastic piece that has a little slit that allows you to expand it a bit. And we're going to have to do that in order to get this thing to fit through. So if you don't see it now, you will in a minute. Let's see if we can zoom in. That's about as far as I can go. But when you go to lift this up, you'll see that this little piece here is not complete all the way around, and we're just going to swap this. We'll move this over to the side, bring this over here, and you're going to have to move this around a little bit. I try to keep one side in if you can. Just lift up one space here so that we can get this thing to fit through. Okay, and once you get it inside, just make sure that lays down flat again like it was when we started. And from here, it's time to put everything back together. So make sure you get this lined up. And we can put these screws back in. Alright, you want to make sure that this directional pad is still in this position and that this little plastic piece didn't come out, because if either of these did, of course you want to put them back in. It's unlikely, but entirely possible. So from here, we will take our motherboard, and I was going to do this under the microscope, but I think I should be able to demonstrate it here well enough. The main thing is that we've got to get underneath all of these wires and flex cables. You have a couple options. You can either try to maneuver around them. You can get something like some blue painter's tape and just tape them out of the way, or once we get the motherboard in, before we put the screws on, we can actually use the tweezers to pull them through. So any of the above will work. Just make sure that you have this lined up properly. I'm going to try to at least get under the antenna wires here and the battery connector. And this one just kind of fell straight in. I really was thinking it was going to give me a much harder time, but if you're careful, you can do some maneuvering without having any problems there. Now the main thing is this: you want to make sure that you don't have any of these cables trapped before you put any of the screws in. So there's our thumbstick cable. We're going to get these two. This one will come from here that way, and this one this way. And then don't forget, we have a fan connector here, and this one's going to be a little tricky to access. I might need a smaller pair of tweezers. We'll see. I'm going to lift up just a hair. There we go. Got that one out. And we are just about ready to start putting things back together. Right, so I'm going to put the charge port screws in first. Now our 3 gold screws. 1, 2, and 3. And then we've got one more right up here. And I'm going to move over to the microscope before I start plugging in these cables so you can get a better view. And I'm going to start with the antenna wires. You want to be very careful with these. They're easy to damage if you push down too hard. So if you feel a lot of resistance, you might want to adjust them. Make sure you got them lined up properly. Alright, and also this black wire should go through this channel right here. You want to make sure that you have this going in like that so it doesn't get smashed when you put things back together. Now over here we've got our thumbstick flex cable. We're going to plug in just like this, and there's a bit of a ridge here that you can kind of grip against, and you want to make sure you go all the way into that line. Flip this down, and then I'm going to go over here to the fan connector and do the same thing. Let's see if we can zoom in a little more. And same thing here, although this one's a little more awkward, and I've actually got the flex cable trapped under the board, so it's not moving right now. I will have to loosen this screw enough to free that up so that it will pull through. Alright, so here's one of the possible things that might happen if you're not careful, or you're trying to make a YouTube video and paying more attention to the monitor than what you're working on. Alright, so this is going to be awkward because I'm right-handed. I'm going to have to flip this around the other way. Let's get this screw in, because it's kind of in my way also. Right, now you get over here like that, and make sure that the white line ends up right there, and we'll flip it closed. And now we've got our fan connected. We will test this when we turn it on, make sure everything's working properly. I'm going to flip, I'm actually just going to go over here to right below where the game card slot is. I still have the switch upside down because this is going to be easier, I think, for both of us to see. Put this cable inside. And it's a little easier than it is on the original Switch. Make sure that goes all the way in, or you will not have an image. Close that, and then right over here, we need to get this one plugged in. Make sure that's open, and that we get underneath just like that. Alright, so up here in the top left corner, we have this trigger, which is fun, because what you have to do is get it inside of this hole. We're going to have to compress this spring enough to get down inside of here, just like that, and then get it to latch over on this side, so that's got to come over this way. And you want to make sure that's nice and straight. It's clicking, and then we get the other piece, and I think when we flip it over, what generally happens is this little rubber piece falls out. So if that's the case, you can just set it right on top of this circle. Just kind of line that up where it's going to be when we finish. And then as you set this on top, it should align so that if you hold this down, you can feel this clicking, and at that point we'll put in our 2 screws. I'm kind of holding this up with my hand so I'm not putting all the pressure on the thumbstick itself. Okay, let's get back over to the other camera. Next thing is going to be our game card reader. So make sure that this is open, and this is going to slide in just like that. Make sure you go all the way across, and then we can flip it down, get our 7 screws back in. It'll just snap straight down. Then we have our one last flex cable that we're going to insert. Make sure it's all the way inside. And now all we have left is our shield. And that's why I don't generally tighten my screws down all the way first, because you want to make sure they're all aligned properly. And we got one more over here on the left. And remember, when we put the back panel on, we want to start at the top. So very carefully, make sure you get this over everything. And we still have to do a bit of maneuvering around the triggers. Let's zoom out here a bit. Alright, but we want to make sure not to put any tension on that thing because it's so easy to break. Okay, so that looks good. We'll work our way around. Everything is lined up. Get our screws inside, and we will be ready to go. There we go. Looks better.